Thank you very much, Angela. Obviously, it's a real pleasure to be here. I just need to start by correcting Angela on one thing. When she said that I started cricket late because I'd originally followed a career in the city, well, actually, I played cricket to avoid having a career in the city. I didn't do that at all, so I just need to get that straight with you. My role today really is to talk to you a little bit about the journey that the England cricket team went on under my leadership between 2009 and 2012. As you can see from the video there were some amazing moments and something I'm very proud of to have been involved in. And I'm going to focus more specifically on the cultural change, what we did culturally in order to encourage the team to get better, and how that allowed us to make that journey from number 5 in the world to number 1 in the world. But before I do that, I just want to give you guys a bit of an appreciation of what it's actually like to be a cricketer playing for England. So in order to do that, I'm going to ask you all just to imagine for a moment that you're an England cricketer and you're about to play the biggest game in your career. It's the night before the game, and I'm going to be specific on the game. The game is the first Test match against Australia in Brisbane, Ashes series. Ashes series are massive. They're massive things. It's the one time that people that aren't necessarily massive cricket fans in our country really get interested in the game of cricket. There's huge expectation, there's huge pressure, there's huge interest. And the reason there is all that expectation, pressure, and interest is because we as a country just love beating the Aussies. It's as simple as that. That is the reason there's all that pressure there. So you're sitting in your hotel room, it's the night before the game, you might have ordered a bit of room service, you're sitting there, and eventually thoughts about what might happen the next day come into your mind. And the first thing you're likely to think about is, I wonder what the gods have got in store for me tomorrow. Could this be one of the defining moments of my career? Could I go out there and achieve something really special tomorrow? And it's a pretty nice thought, and you think about that and you think, oh, that sounds great. But it doesn't take very long before some negative thoughts start coming into your mind. You know, our minds are very good at alerting us to danger. It's kind of the way that we avoided getting eaten by lions and tigers thousands of years ago. And in this particular circumstance, there's a lot of danger around because with an Ashes series, if you win, you're a hero. But if you lose, you're a zero and you're going to be criticised. And certainly, if you have a bad series, you know that your place in the side might be in jeopardy. You know that your central contract, your means of making money might be in jeopardy. But also, you know that you might potentially let down your friends and family. You might let down the coaches that have spent a lot of time investing in you over the years. And so these thoughts go through your mind and you start thinking, wow, this could be a terrible thing. What about to happen could be horrendously bad for me. Not surprisingly were those sort of thoughts going in your mind. By the way, all the time you're trying to supplant those thoughts with positive thoughts, but it's not easy, you know, your mind keeps playing tricks on you. Not surprisingly, with those sort of thoughts going on in your mind, you find that sleep is hard to come by. So if you're lucky, you're going to get a very fitful night's sleep. You're going to be checking your watch every couple of hours to make sure you haven't overslept the alarm. If you're unlucky, you're going to be staring at the ceiling for hours upon end. And one of my predecessors as England captain, a guy by the name of Nasser Hussain, who some of you may know, he was famous for almost just giving up on sleeping during a test match. And what he used to do, instead of trying to sleep, is he'd get the bat. He had a bat at the end of his bed, and he'd get it, and he'd walk to the mirror in his hotel room, and he'd practice all these shots, all the shots he was likely to play the next day, complete start naked. You know, no clothing on at all. It's not a great thought, I can imagine. And certainly if you're in the room next to him or beneath him, you keep hearing this tap, tap, tapping as the bat hit the floor while he's practicing these shots. So you've had a pretty bad night's sleep. You wake up in the morning, you're feeling exhausted. You've got this knot in your stomach. You're feeling, you know, this is a massive day in my life. Not surprisingly, you're not very hungry. You might have a piece of toast or something like that. But you get on the team bus and you arrive at the ground. And this is a time where, thankfully, the buzz, the atmosphere starts getting the adrenaline going, and some of those negative thoughts that are going on in your mind sort of disappear into the background. And you start doing your normal warm-up routine. So you'll have a stretch, you'll hit some balls, you'll do some fielding practice. The toss will then go up, and you'll be batting first. In this case, you're batting first. I'm assuming here that we're all batsmen, okay? So you know you're batting first, and now you go into this real routine. All those negative thoughts are out to one side. You go into this routine that you've done thousands of times before. You're just thinking about the process now. You're not thinking about what might happen at a later date. And for me, my routine was I used to put my right pad on first, then my left, then put my thigh pad on, my gloves, my helmet. And then I'd start getting a little bit like a boxer does before going out. I'd get quite kind of edgy. I'd be doing a lot of shadow batting, a lot of jumping on the spot to try and get myself going. 5 minutes before the actual toss, before the game starts, you'll hear this bell, and it's the worker. We call it the worker, and it's basically signifying to all of us that the game's about to begin. The umpires are going out. You'll hear this huge cheer as the Australians go onto the ground. 38,000 Aussies baying for English blood. You'll be down there in the tunnel. You'll look at your opening partner, Alistair Cook, and you'll say, "Come on, mate, let's do it." And you walk out, and this is what happens. Well, I never liked that commentator, by the way, a guy called Michael Slater. Now, the reason for sharing that story with you is not just for you to share in my humiliation. It wasn't one of my proudest moments. But it was actually just to give you guys an appreciation that professional sportsmen generally, and certainly in my experience, all the professional cricketers I was involved with, they struggle with insecurity, and they struggle to keep these negative thoughts at bay, and they are likely to get very self-absorbed and worry about their own situation, their own place in the side, and they're worried about what the future might hold. Now, if you've got a good team culture, I believe it provides you with a bit of a lifeboat to take people away from that thinking, that self-absorption, and allow them to think a little bit more about the team situation, how their teammates are going. Can I look after them? What is my role in the side? How can I help the team get better? That lifeboat takes you away from your fears. If, on the other hand, the team culture is bad, what you get is 11 people, their heads bobbing up and down in a sea of fear and anxiety. And it's a horrible place to be, and I know that because that was the situation with the England team when I took over as captain. Why was the England team in such a bad state? Well, there are a number of reasons for it, 4 primary reasons. Firstly, if you look at the guy at the top left-hand corner of the screen, there's a guy called Alan Stanford. He was a Texan financier who was heavily involved with West Indian cricket. He's actually now in jail for fraud. But he came up with this idea that a West Indian side should play an English side for $20 million. Okay? The winner of that game, each player would take home $1 million a man. The losers of that game would take home nothing. Okay, so those were the terms of the deal. Now, as you can imagine, with that sort of money that's flying around, there were a lot of discussions taking place behind the scenes. So those who were involved with the England team were saying, well, you know, if we win, should it just be the 11 players that get that money? Surely the support staff that have helped them prepare should get some money. What about the players that play in different forms of the game? What about the guys that play in Test cricket and one-day cricket rather than just 2020 cricket, which is what this form of the game was? And needless to say, quite a few divisions started opening up in the side. You know, there were a lot of disagreements about how it should happen. Thankfully, in a way, England lost the game. So we didn't have to worry about it. But the damage had already been done, and certainly the players weren't happy about going through this whole scenario, especially because Alan Stanford, on the night of the game, got all the players' wives to sit on his knee, which didn't go down well with the players at all, I can assure you. The second problem we had was that my predecessor as England captain, a guy called Kevin Peterson, who some of you may have heard of, was a bit of a maverick with the bat in his hand, and he was also a bit of a maverick as a captain. And there was a real problem between him and Peter Moores, the guy at the bottom left of the screen there, who was the coach at the time, in that they hated each other, quite frankly. And certainly for 3 months prior to Kevin Peterson taking over as captain, they hadn't spoken a word to each other. So it was hardly the ingredients for a match made in heaven. And pretty soon after he took over the captaincy, Kevin decided the best thing for the team was to get rid of the coach. And he made a concerted effort to get the coach sacked. He achieved his aim in January 2009. Unfortunately, he also achieved the aim of getting himself sacked in the process. So, as you can imagine, when the leaders of the team are going through this sort of conflict, what do players do? Well, either they get brought into one camp or the other, in which case it's divisive, or they stick their head in the sands and worry about their own performances, about their own place in the team, all the stuff I was talking about before. So that really didn't help the team environment. It certainly made things more difficult for us. The final piece of the jigsaw, which is perhaps unsurprising, is that we weren't playing well. You know, as a result of this disunity in the team, we weren't playing well. We'd lost two really important test series against South Africa and against India, and we'd lost our last one-day series 5-0 to India as well. So things weren't looking good. In fact, on the surface, we looked disunited. We looked like there were cliques in the side. We looked like we didn't know what our style of play was. And all in all, it was a terrible situation for me to take over the captaincy. Or so I thought at the time. You know, certainly when I was offered the job, I was worried that, look, this is a poison chalice. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do about that. Having said that, though, when I look back at it, it was actually the perfect situation to take over. You know, everyone in the side realized that things had to change. You know, the way things were going in the team, it wasn't sustainable. No one was happy. No one was playing well. And it made it really easy for me to answer that question, why? Why change? And myself and Andy Flower, who took over as coach at the same time, found it very easy to bring the players with us. Why change? Well, because what we've done so far hasn't worked. We've got to do things differently. And where we really need to focus our attention was on the culture of the side. So we went about trying to change the culture. The first area that I felt really strongly about in terms of changing the culture was that we had to allow the players to think for themselves. You know, one of the real problems with professionalism in my mind is that in this day and age, you get so many support staff helping you play. So you'll have a physiologist, you have a physiotherapist, you have a psychologist, you have an analyst, you'll have a media relations person, you'll have a batting coach, a bowling coach, a head coach, doctors. You have all these people in jobs trying to help you win. But the problem is with all that information around, firstly, players can get overloaded by information, which is not helpful because you need a clear mind. You need to be able to clear your mind in order to play properly. But secondly, you run the danger of drifting into a teacher-pupil relationship where the coaches tell you what to do, the players either nod their heads obediently, or deep down are resentful of the fact that they're being told what to do, when in actual fact they are world-class performers in their own right. And a good example of this for me was a test we had to do every morning, which we called the piss test. And what that test was that when you arrived at the ground, you had to go to the loos and provide a sample and put that sample in an osmeter, I think it was called, and it would measure your hydration levels. Now, if you're in Sri Lanka and it's 35 degrees and it's 98% humidity, this is a really important test for us to do because if you get dehydrated, it's going to affect your performance and ultimately it's going to affect the performance of the team. If, however, you're in Wellington in New Zealand, it's 7 degrees outside, you've all got 5 jumpers on, and you've won the toss, and only 2 of you are going out there in the middle because you're batting, the rest of the 9 are sitting in the dressing room, then being badgered by the physiologist to go and do this sample created resentment. The players didn't like being told what to do all the time. And so it was pretty clear to me that if you looked at a team that was really successful, a team that won consistently, it was filled with a lot of self-reliant cricketers who knew their roles in the side well, who were able to make really good decisions for themselves under pressure. Well, you couldn't get players to make good decisions for themselves under pressure if you didn't give them the opportunity to make decisions for themselves off the park. So we had to introduce a way of allowing players to have more ownership of their games. And the first thing we did is we made a lot of practices completely voluntary. Turn up if you want, don't turn up if you want, you prepare the way you want to. But bear in mind that we're giving you that flexibility, we're giving you ownership of your game, but therefore you'll be accountable for those performances. So that was the sort of first strand that we looked at. Give people much more flexibility, give them much more ownership of the game. The other thing I had to do, which was a bit of a touchy subject at the time, was to try and get the coaches to buy into the fact that actually we needed to use them as consultants rather than the management. You know, the players needed to go to the support staff and say, listen, I'm having a problem with this. I really need to change this. Can you help me do that? And we needed the coaches to buy into it. Thankfully, they did. And it was a really important first step for us because the players took responsibility. They took ownership of the side, and that allowed us to deal with the second issue we had. Now, the second issue was putting the team first. Now, you know, we hear that all the time. I'm sure you guys hear that. You know, putting the team in front of the individual. It's something that all companies, all organizations need to do. The real question is, how do you do that? That is the question. Richard Lewis, the CEO, very kindly sent me a presentation of some of the values that you guys have been working on in the last 6 months. And there was a quote in that presentation from Gandhi, which was that we need to be the change we want to see. So you've got to be the change you want to see. And this is the way that myself and Andy Flower approach this issue. The first thing we had to do prior to doing anything else was we had to get rid of the baggage in the side. There was a lot of baggage that had built up over a number of years. I described the issues that were in the side earlier. Well, we had to get the players to be honest with each other and say the problems they had with each other. And we had to do it in a very kind of non-confrontational way. And we actually had this meeting in Jamaica in the West Indies. And Andy Flower ran the meeting outstandingly well. And we got a lot off our chest. Issues that have been kind of nagging away at us for years and years. We got it off our chest. We approached players. We spoke to them directly. Everyone in the room had a chance to speak. And it allowed us to have a fresh start. And that was a really important part of the process, because without that feeling of it being a fresh start, that baggage would have continued alongside us. But as I said, we had to become the change we wanted to see, which meant that myself and Andy Flower had to become that change. We had to show everyone how important the team environment was to us. But also, we needed to sell it to the players, because ultimately, we needed the players to be the change we wanted to see. And the way we went about that was, firstly, setting up a charter of behaviors. So I got in a room with all the players, and just like you guys have done, the players themselves came out with a charter of our values, of what it meant to play for England, of what behaviors we wanted to see, of what behaviors we didn't want to see, and also how they were going to police that internally as players, rather than having to rely on the management to do that. And that was a really important step in the process the players bought into, because they'd come up with it. They'd bought into the idea of this charter, and they were very keen to make sure it worked. That was a really important first step. The second step we had to make was we had to demonstrate on a day-to-day basis how important contributions to the team were. And a good example of that for me was celebrating people's success. So when you had a really good day for England, when you scored 100 or took 5 wickets, what tended to happen was you'd come in, you'd be really proud of yourself. You know, if you're lucky, I played 500 days of Test cricket for England. I scored 2,100, so I had 21 good days out of 500. It doesn't happen all that often. But what tended to happen is you come in the dressing room, everyone would give you a tap on the shoulder. Well done, mate, well played. I'm off to the restaurant, and out they go. Well, you know, I felt it was really important that when someone did do something right, that we celebrated that, and we all made them aware of how much we valued their contribution. So what we did was very simple. When anyone either got 100 or took 5 wickets, we'd all get a beer. We'd get a load of beers in the dressing room, even though it was in the middle of a test match. We'd have a load of beers in the dressing room. Everyone would have a beer. Someone would give a speech to say how well the guy had played and how much we valued his contribution. And we'd have a toast, and then we'd all sit around for half an hour just chatting about the day's play and chatting about that guy's contribution. Well, as soon as we introduced this, our performances went through the roof. It was extraordinary. We scored so many hundreds and took so many 5-wicket hauls, and it's all got to be on the back of the motivating factor of alcohol. Never underestimate alcohol's value in life. But it was a really important thing to show people's contribution to the team. The third piece of the jigsaw was introducing shared hardship, going through some tough times together. And we started off by doing a lot of kind of team hardship sessions, really pushing ourselves pretty hard and doing it in groups, so you're relying on each other in order to achieve the goal. But the most important thing was we went on a boot camp to Germany, and that's the picture up there. That was the kind of boxing side of it, which didn't actually go down all that well because James Anderson, who's in that picture there, broke his rib in the boxing side, so that wasn't ideal. But the ethos of this camp was to take you down to a place you'd never been before, take you so far down that it really hurt, and then bring you back up the other side again. Well, I never got the second half of it. I got the first half, being taken down to the bottom. I didn't get the second half of it. On the first day, we had to carry bricks with us for 14 miles. We had to walk for 14 miles with bricks in our hands. And if anyone dropped a brick, everyone would have to go down and do a series of grueling exercises for about 10 minutes. At the end of that day, your arms are absolutely in agony. But it's amazing that on the tour that followed it in Australia, the one that you saw the footage of there, how many times the players referred to carrying those bricks. Well, we could be carrying bricks now. We've been through harder stuff. It's a great bonding experience to do really hard stuff together. The final piece in the jigsaw on putting the team first is getting rid of problem players. It's all very well saying that the team comes first, but there are going to be some people that are resistant to it. And it might be for a number of reasons. It might be because they've been scarred in the past, or just their temperament doesn't allow them to do that, or they're interested in their own success. Well, we just couldn't afford players like that in the side. If we wanted this to be real, if we wanted it to be more than just a piece of paper that's stuck up on a wall, we needed people to buy into it. And if they weren't willing to do it, then they had to go. And about 3 or 4 players had their England careers cut short by the very virtue of the fact they weren't willing to buy into that. And, I don't make any excuses for that or any apologies for it. That is the reality, the harsh reality of international sport. You either buy into something or you don't. So that was largely the way we went about instilling the team coming first. There was one other area that we needed to work on, though, and that was getting rid of distractions. We had a really unhealthy fascination with things that didn't help us win games. So on the one hand, it was commercial appearances and sponsors. On the other hand, it was building up opposition players too much and too much talk about how great opposition players were. But the major distraction we had, and it's something that all international cricketers have got to deal with, is the press. We had a long-standing and really unhealthy mistrust in the press. Players used to get really frustrated by what the press said about us. And certainly if the press started speculating about someone's place in the side, then that would really start all those emotions that I talked about right at the start going. Am I good enough? Am I going to keep my place in the side? It really devalued what we were trying to do. So we had to approach this problem and tackle it head on. And the way we did it was, firstly, we banned newspapers from the dressing room. That might seem a little bit draconian, but in actual fact, the dressing room had to be our refuge from all outside distractions. We had to get distractions out of the way so people could relax, they could buy into the team environment, they could help each other out. If those distractions are right there in front of you in black and white, then you're not going to have that purpose. You're not going to have the dressing room being a refuge. So they needed to be banned. But more than just banning them, we really wanted to create an environment where players didn't want to read what was said about them. We really had to work hard on trying to instill this notion in people's minds that what is being written in the papers is not for your benefit. What they're trying to do is either tell everyone you're brilliant or tell everyone you're terrible in order to sell newspapers. That's not helpful for us to see, because actually if you want to play consistently, you need to keep on a very consistent, even keel. And if you're told you're brilliant or if you're told you're terrible, it's very hard to do that. So we had to drag people's attention away from what the newspapers were saying. The other notion we really wanted to kind of exaggerate and promote was that what went in the four walls of our dressing room stayed within the four walls of our dressing room. We wanted to create a bit of a bubble around us that people didn't know exactly what was going on. They were interested to know, but we'd keep it within the four walls of the dressing room. And certainly early on, we had a bit of problem with social media, Twitter in particular, about players saying things that they shouldn't have done. We had to come down quite hard on them. But it created that little bubble and that little bit of aura. A lot of people going, I wonder what they are doing in that dressing room. I wonder what they are doing. Having said all of that, I never felt that the media was something to be feared. I always feel like you can use it for your advantage. And whenever anyone went up in front of a camera, we always try to encourage them to talk as much as possible about the culture in the top side, about the unity in the side, because you're almost selling that to the cricketing public. You're selling that to the world, and you're also making the opposition team understand that that is what you're about as a side. And certainly for myself as captain, I use that as a way to get through to the players quite a lot. Constantly talking about our culture and how important it was for us and how much we played for each other. If I'm saying it out there in the media, the players will see that, and it's a reminder to them that that's what we're about as a side. So those were the angles that we approached the culture side on. And it really helped us to move the side forward. It was a slow process to start with. It's almost like trying to get a juggernaut going. To begin with, it's really, really slow, and you see some signs of encouragement, and then it goes backwards again. But once you get a momentum going, it's amazing how quickly you can go. And we noticed that the players could come back from setbacks much better. If you'd had a bad result, if you'd performed badly, it was much easier for players to come back and turn that round later on. So, for instance, if you got naught in the first innings of the biggest game of your life, you possibly were able to turn it round. Sorry, I just had to get that in there. Apologies for that. So we had the culture up and running, and that was something that we had to continue to guard against and nurture, and it's always an ongoing process. It never goes away completely, and it's always something you've got to be conscious of. But once we had the culture up and running, we had to really decide for ourselves, well, where do we want to go with this? What do we want to achieve? What are our goals? And we settled quite quickly on we wanted to be the best England side ever, which seems like quite a lofty goal. But in actual fact, no England side had been number one in the world for any extended period of time. So our focus sort of drifted in a little bit more on getting to number one in the world. Once we got that goal, we had to work out, well, how do we get there? How do we actually make the transition from where we are at the moment, number 5 in the world, to number 1 in the world? And this is where our analyst came in, and he was a fantastic, really, really clever bloke, and he used a lot of the principles of Moneyball. I know you guys have heard this has been spoken about already in this conference. So Moneyball, for those of you who don't know, it was a way of delving beneath the surface of statistics in baseball to find out what really made a difference in terms of winning and losing baseball games. And it sort of threw a lot of the old baseball conventions out the window. Well, that's what we tasked our analysts in doing. We needed to innovate. We needed to find out what our strengths were. We needed to find out how we actually get better. And also, we need to find out what actually does it take to win games of cricket. And one of the things he did, which was fantastic, was he built this model. Don't ask me how he did it, but he built this kind of game prediction model where he fed in data from thousands of cricket matches over the decades previously. And then he would put various variables in that model to find out what actually helped you win games and what wasn't that important. And so, things like the balance of the side, how you selected the side, which individual players you put in the side, what sort of pitches you wanted to play against opposition players on. All those sort of things he delved into and gave us a much better understanding of what it took to win cricket matches. Because if we wanted to get to number one in the world, we had to win a lot of cricket matches. It was as simple as that. But the other thing that was really interesting to us was that firstly, he showed us a better understanding of what opposition players' weaknesses were. And more importantly, he showed us what our strengths and weaknesses were. And that meant that we were able to tailor a game plan according to what our strengths were. And our game plan was not all that sophisticated. It was about strangulating opposition players. It was about building up pressure. It was about laying a foundation with the bat. None of it sexy stuff, but we knew that we were playing to our strengths. On the innovation side, we also needed to change the way we practiced and prepared, because if we kept doing the things we'd been doing over the previous 5 or 6 years, the likelihood is that we would have got the same results. So Andy Flower, the coach, was lucky enough to be invited to watch an American football team do their practice session. And the one thing that really stood out for him was how deliberate their practice was, how focused it was, how intense it was. Every time they started a drill, they'd have a stop clock, like a stopwatch up in the corner of the stadium. It would be set on 3 minutes. They'd do this drill, full pace, full intensity for 3 minutes. A big hooter would go to signify the end of the session, the drill. They'd then relax, talk about what went on, chill out for a bit, and then go on to the next one. Well, all that was in quite stark contrast to the way we did things in cricket, which tended to be quite long, laborious sessions, bowlers sort of bowling 75%, batsmen going through the motions. We weren't going to get better doing it that way. So we introduced that sort of thing, short, sharp sessions, really deliberate, intense sessions. But the other thing we try to do is replicate match situations much more. So a much greater element of competition between batsmen and bowlers and competition between players to try and get that edge. You know, if you want to feel comfortable in the middle in a really tough environment, then you needed to practice better. And that competition between players was a big part of that. So that was basically how we approached the practice. And the great thing about it was that because it was more focused, we could sort of split the practice up into smaller segments. We could decide this is going to be a little segment where we're really testing ourselves. This is a little segment where you're working on your weaknesses. But the most important part of every practice we did was working on our strengths. You know, we wanted our strengths to be genuinely world-class, so that if an opposition team didn't play well against us, they played to our strengths, they would get obliterated, you know. There was no point in our strengths just being okay or pretty good. We had to make sure that if our strengths were good, they were going to be better than anyone else's in world cricket. So that was the preparation side. There was one more aspect to the way we did things, and that was we really looked at the little 1%ers, how we can do things just a little bit better that might enable us to win games of cricket. And by that, we looked at the way we prepared our pitches to make sure they were going to be advantageous for us. We looked at our tour planning schedules to see if that was going to give us the best chance of preparing for games. We worked very hard on our catching and fielding because that's probably more than a 1%er. That was a 5%er. And we also looked at a lot of really small other things. And the one story I want to share with you is about shining the cricket ball. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about shining the cricket ball. It can be quite scientific, so I'll try and keep it quite simple. But when you see a bowler rubbing the ball on his trousers, what he's trying to do is trying to get one side of the ball really shiny so that air resistance is less on that side of the ball swings. It's a great skill for a bowler to have, and most sides are pretty good at getting the ball swinging. The next piece in the jigsaw, and the much harder piece to achieve, is to getting the ball reverse swinging. Now, reverse swing happens when one side of the ball is exceptionally dry, and there are little scuffs that are taken out of the ball, and for some reason, the law of aerodynamics suggests that instead of the ball going how you expect it to do, it goes the other way. Now, I've never understood the science of it. Someone's tried to explain it to me. It still doesn't make sense to me. But what you do need to know is that you need to keep that one side of the ball exceptionally dry. So with that in mind, we thought, well, how can we make sure that we keep that side of the ball exceptionally dry? And we realized that the guy that was handling the ball, the guy that was actually shining the ball on a ball-by-ball basis, an over-by-over basis, it was really important he had dry hands. So we did a number of tests back at Loughborough. We did a really hard training session, and then we all got swabs taken of how much we were actually sweating. And one guy really stood out, and that was Alistair Cook, the opening batsman. He just didn't sweat. I don't know if he just doesn't have sweat glands or what, but he didn't sweat at all. It was extraordinary. And so what we decided, well, he doesn't sweat. He's got to shine the ball. And the bowlers kind of taught him what he needed to do. We were able to keep that shiny, the dry side of the ball really dry. And on more than one occasion, that ability to reverse swing the ball won us test matches. I can think of one obvious occasion in Melbourne against Australia where we could get the ball reverse swinging. They couldn't. We took wickets. They didn't. We won the game. Small 1%er makes a massive difference. So the innovation really took us forward and allowed us to gain that momentum. We started winning more consistently. And obviously, when you win more consistently, you get more belief. And the belief sort of helps you go on. We tracked our progress. We knew what we needed to do to get to number one in the world. We thought it was a 4-year plan to get there. And we actually did it a year early. We got to number one in the world a year early, which is a fantastic achievement. I was very proud of everything that everyone did in order to reach that. And in a lot of ways, I'd love to finish that presentation here. But unfortunately, there is one other aspect that I need to talk to you about. Because as soon as we got to number one in the world, things got a bit trickier for us. You know, a lot of people started tapping us on the back, saying how great we were. A lot of us got a little bit satisfied. We'd achieved our goal. And it was really hard for us to focus on what is our next goal. What are we going to do next? Because getting to number one in the world was an obvious target. And it was something that we could measure. Well, where do we go from there? Do we say, well, we want to stay number one in the world for the next 12 months? That doesn't really sound like a particularly exciting goal. It kind of signifies you standing still in a way. Or, you know, do you want to go on and get something grand and lofty, like we want to create a legacy for ourselves and be one of the great teams ever? Well, again, that's really hard to measure, and, you know, perhaps you're getting ahead of your station. So we struggled with this. We couldn't really work out what it was we wanted to do. And at the same time, we realized that the way other people approached us was different. Suddenly, you know, we were the tall poppy. We were the one to be beaten. They're the number ones. Let's knock them off their perch. And every team we played against had that extra bit of kind of grit about them. They really wanted to beat us at all costs. And we found ourselves in a bit of a difficult situation because I knew, myself, Andy Flower, and a lot of the management knew that we needed to re-innovate. We needed to go again. We needed to push ourselves harder. But there was one problem with that, and that was that it was much harder to answer that question, why? A lot of the players would go, well, hold on, why are we trying to do things differently? You know, surely we've got a method that works for us. We know this method works. Let's just keep it simple. Let's not get funky. Let's not do things differently. Let's just stick with that. And myself and Andy were going, well, if we stick with it, then other people are going to overtake us pretty quickly. But the problem we had is we didn't sell it well enough, and actually maybe deep down we weren't sharp enough in recognizing that the moment you get to number one is the moment you really have to re-innovate. You've got to go again. You've got to show everyone, both yourselves, the guys in the team, the media, English supporters, that you're not satisfied. You're willing to work to move forward. You're willing to work harder than you have up to that point to get there. And it's one of the hardest things, I believe, is winning after winning, getting to the top and staying at the top. And we made a mistake. And 12 months after we got to number one in the world, we got deposed by South Africa, and it was a real wake-up call for us. Thankfully, I think everyone involved in the England team have learned the lessons from that. They have re-innovated. This is on the back, you know, I've retired now, but Alistair Cook and Andy Flower have taken the side forward, and they've been able to win a test series in India for the first time in 26 years, which is a fantastic feather in their caps. And the England team, in my opinion, should go from strength to strength because the cultural base is still there. That's all I've got for you today. It's been a real pleasure. It's been really fantastic to come to your conference. Of course, I'll be more than willing to answer any questions that any of you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We do have a lot of questions that have come through. They're a tough lot, this lot, and they want names.
Oh, no.
So one of the questions is, who are the players whose careers were cut short, who didn't buy into your philosophy?
That is one that's hard for me to give names on because it would be unfair on them. But look, if you're that interested, trawl back and look through some of the players that were playing in 2009 and are no longer playing. It's not that difficult an assignment for you to do.
And then another one with a name, how do you manage Freddie Flintoff?
Well, actually, there have been harder people to manage in my time.
Well, that's the next
we don't
one.
need to get into that. Look, Freddie was a fantastic guy to have in our team. You know, I think he, in a lot of ways, epitomised a guy that was genuinely, incredibly passionate about playing for his country. And you could see that every time he went out on the pitch, that kind of energy that he created. He got the crowd going behind him. He really could make a difference to matches. Right at the end of his career, the last year or so, I think he felt a bit disjointed in the side, and that was mainly due to the fact that he'd spent so much time out of the side with injury, and he felt a bit uncomfortable in the environment, and maybe that was, you know, a contributing factor in him deciding to retire alongside the injuries he had. But never underestimate the power that someone like that has to turn the course of a match. You know, he was one of these characters that the opposition feared, and you've always got to recognise that those characters are very, very valuable to have in your side.
And following on from that, how do you manage somebody who does persistently challenge your authority? That was another question that came.
Well, you know, I don't think it's about necessarily persistently challenging your authority. I think it's about if someone persistently shows that he's not interested in putting the team first, then there's only one solution, and he needs to at least spend some time out the side, or more kind of draconian, he needs to be dropped for good. And you know, it should never be a thing where the leader's trying to assert his authority by making an example of the player. I don't think that's the way forward. But you know you've got a problem when a player is upsetting the rest of the players in the group. People that buy into the team environment, buy into what you're trying to do, if they're getting upset by a player, then obviously it's time you need to take action.
And is that the same sort of advice you'd give to deal with someone who is potentially disruptive to the team as well?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, there are all sorts of individuals in a side. You know, everyone's got different character traits. We're not all the same. We're all driven by different motivations and all that sort of stuff. That's fine. You know, people should, and I'm talking about people having ownership of their game. People should be allowed to express themselves. I think that's a really important thing because it brings out the best in people, but within certain boundaries. And if those people get outside of those boundaries, then it's really important they're brought back, not just for their own good, but actually as a demonstration to everyone in the side that those are where the boundaries are. You know, you can't step outside of those, and if you do, it's going to come back to haunt you.
You mentioned Freddie and not underestimating perhaps the good and the thing that a person like that can do in terms of changing a game around, changing a team around, a very talented individual. Another question we had is it advisable to build a team around one player?
No, I would say it was very inadvisable to do that for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, that player, that individual might go elsewhere. That individual might get injured. But also, you know, a team can never work around one person. I've been in a lot of instances in my career where the team I was involved with had one or two star players, and one or two of those star players left the team. And actually, you look at it at the time and you think, there's no way we can cope. These are our best players. They're going. How are we going to cope? Well, it's amazing how quickly other people fill the void, especially if you allow them to, you know. And if those individual star players are kind of dominating the dressing room too much, are sort of intimidating the other players in the team, then often it's actually better for the team to not have that one or two star players. If you can get everyone working in unison, that's obviously the best case scenario.
We have got some roving mics around, so if any of you have thought of a question that you didn't submit by the iPad, we might have time for those. So if you want to put up your hands, the ladies with the roving mics will find you. So if anybody does have a question, please put up your hand now. And while they're doing that, there's a question that I'd quite like to ask is what do you think of Shane Warne's makeover?
Well, it's pretty scary, actually. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but he's kind of I don't know if he's had liposuction or what, but he's kind of lost about 4 stone, and I think there's a little bit of Botox or something going on. He's definitely got fake hair. And yeah, I mean, he doesn't look quite right. But having said that, he got me out about 15 times in my career, so I don't have any right to pass any judgment on him.
Excellent. Are there any questions there out in the audience? Where? Down there. Down there.
Is it working?
Try again.
Try again. Is that working? Not working. Well, you speak loudly. Yeah, okay. You said in your talk, and thanks very much for that, working now, I think, that part of the cultural change within the organisation was allowing the players to compete within themselves. So they were performing better. On one hand, that's slightly contradictory that they're competing amongst themselves, but how did you get that across to them that would bring a better team performance if they were competing against themselves to be better each time?
Yeah, I don't see it as being massively contradictory. I mean, the point of them competing amongst themselves was to put them under pressure in practice. So if it was all too lovey-dovey and friendly, then we're not actually getting out of practice what we really needed, which was for people to replicate a match situation. What we didn't want was people competing amongst themselves in terms of, I hope I do better than him because therefore I'll stay in the team and he'll be under pressure for his spot on the side. We never encouraged that sort of competition. In fact, we really discouraged that because it was unhelpful to us. So, once you were in the team environment, then you stayed in the team environment. We had this line, it was like a kind of bubble that was around us, and you felt comfortable within that bubble. The competition came more about challenging ourselves rather than anything else. No problems.
Any other questions out there? Gentleman in the white shirt over there.
Yeah, thank you. With Alistair Cook now having scored more Test centuries than you did, how many more is he going to get, and how will he fare in the back-to-back Ashes?
Well, firstly, I think he's going to go and break all English records of all time. I mean, he might end up, if not being the world's highest Test run scorer or century maker, he'll be right up there in the top 3 or 4. I mean, he's that good. He's only 28 years old now. He's been going for ages. I mean, he started probably a year and a half after I did, and he's still got 5 or 6 years left in him. So, he's got a tremendous future ahead of him. He's incredibly fit. He's incredibly dedicated. He's an unbelievably good player. And he's a nice bloke. In fact, he's a really annoying person. He's a horrible character. How we fare in the back-to-back Ashes? Well, we've got a great chance to beat them. I think we'll go in as favourites, which actually is never a tag that England cricketers have particularly enjoyed playing under, because I think we always like being the kind of the hungry guys, the guys that are chasing someone else. But I think we've got the skills and the confidence, having won in India, to win in England, certainly. In Australia, I think it's going to be a bit harder for us. Those conditions suit their players a little bit more. So that's going to be more of a challenge. But for the first time ever, I don't know if you guys know this, you've got back-to-back Ashes within 6 months of each other. So any momentum you can gain in that first half potentially can take you quite a long way in the second half back in Australia as well.
Thank you very much.
And there was a gentleman in a white shirt a little bit further along from there. Do you want to stand up? Thank you.
What actually made you retire in the end? Did you think you'd gone as far as you could, or did you just not like the travelling, or did you think Alistair Cook was just going to score more runs?
I did think he was going to score more runs. That wasn't the reason I retired. I mean, in truth, you know, the job of England captaincy is a difficult one. It wears away at you. It's very stressful. It's hard to switch off. And I'd been on the road for 9 or 10 years solidly. I'd missed a lot of my kids growing up. I was getting more and more frustrated by the idea of being away from home. And that, on some deep level, kind of affected my hunger, I suppose, for the game. But also, actually, I didn't feel I was batting well enough. I think the standard of my batting was dropping a bit. I was feeling a bit slower. I was feeling a bit more lethargic. There were a lot of signs that maybe this was the time to go. And I always looked at other cricketers that carried on too long and said, I don't want to be like them. I'd rather go a little bit early, and while people still wanted you to be there, rather than going on too long past your sell-by date.
And I think one final question. Do you think that cricket should be part of the Olympics?
Well, I struggle with all these other sports like golf and tennis, and I'm not convinced it is. Someone mentioned that the real test is the Olympics the biggest thing in that sport, and that should be the way to look at it. I think in the cricketing sense, I'm not sure it would be. But there'd be cricket administrators up and down the country screaming at me because it's a great way of increasing the profile of the game and getting countries around the world to take up the game. So my gut feeling says no, but maybe it is best for the game of cricket if it was.
It's been a real pleasure having you here. Andrew Strauss, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And before Andrew goes, I'd just like to invite Richard Lewis up to the stage.
I've got some ceremonial duties here today. If there's one thing I look for in my teammates, something that I really valued more than other, it would be loyalty, it would be commitment, it would be willingness to put the team first, be willingness to keep improving and willingness to stay the course as well. And apparently one of your employees has really shown all those traits in the long time he served with Best Western Hotels. He's retiring this year, and I'd really like Keith Pope to come and receive this as a token of the firm's gratitude for all you've done.
Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
From one left hand back to the other.
All right, exactly. Congratulations.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks very much, Keith.
Absolute
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.